Orlando, Florida, you are listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, David Gornoski. So glad to be with you once again in our beautiful neighborhood. And we are all about solving the problems neighbor to neighbor, not focusing on tribalism and which team's got enough seats in this legislative body or that, but really on seeing our neighbors just as ourselves, as flesh and blood human beings made with dignity. And we are always going to cut through the noise and confusion and bring you the stories you don't always hear. Whether that's the scapegoats of our criminal justice system, we have many guests on, wonderful, powerful stories they tell of being thrown in the belly of our government for decades for nonviolent petty mistakes. Or if it's people in innovation or creativity that are being excluded from the public conversation. And then in addition to that, we sometimes meet academics, people who are working in university settings, but end up becoming, I would say, scapegoats of their culture and excluded sometimes viciously and sometimes attacked by some of the radical cultural elements that seem to be really creating a monolithic groupthink on our university campuses. And so in this hour, I want to speak with an interesting professor. I just heard his story in National Review. His name is Samuel Abrams, Dr. Samuel Abrams, and he is at Sarah Lawrence College, and he's a professor of political theory. And I understand that he has run into some vicious blowback because he is slightly not leftist. Is that correct, Dr. Abrams?
That is correct. The sad part about your description of me being sadly not leftist is if you take a look at the students who are leading the charge and the few of them who are willing to put their names out there, one of the things that a lot of students like to do nowadays is hide behind anonymity. They don't want to be named. They'll make very vicious, vitriolic, horrendous, in many cases slanderous and libelous claims and defamatory claims against certain people, but then they won't tell you who they are, and they get a lot of attention for it. What's disturbing about it is I looked at the list of the people that I was able to identify and of the people who signed onto the demand list. I know almost none of them. These are people that I don't believe I've ever actually met, have ever actually sat down and had a conversation with. And, you know, in your lead-in, you talked about bringing communities together and how we cut through a lot of the nonsense. Well, one way to do that is through face-to-face interactions and hearing the other side. Sadly, what's so upsetting to me about this case is that these students have never taken classes with me. They've never come to my office. They've never attended my events, my programs, yet they make very gross and inappropriate conclusions about who I am, what I believe in.
Right. Now, and your academics, credentials are very good. Your PhD, Harvard University, Stanford University, you're a fellow of the Academic Social Science Research at NYU. So you've been all over the place. Council on Foreign Relations. I have to quiz you about that one.
Sure.
Why do they have such a animus against you? What was the inciting incident where you became persona non grata?
Sure. So it goes back much longer than even today. The last couple of months, and I actually have said for a while that I have felt like there's been a target on my back since the day I actually started at Sarah Lawrence College.
And when was that?
A couple of years after I was hired and made tenure, a number of faculty actually said to me, "You were a diversity hire," and usually that term refers to some form of racial or ethnic minority hire. I'm not of that. I'm white. But, people said, we hired you because we knew you were right of center and you were an empiricist, someone who looks at facts, looks at numbers, because the school was, very deficient in those areas, believe it or not. And I knew from the get-go that people around the campus knew that and were uncomfortable because I demanded that we talk about facts. How do we establish the truth? I open all of my courses actually with a phrase or saying from Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a New York state senator, former professor at Harvard, where I actually did my PhD. We never overlapped. He was considerably older. But he said something along the lines of, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts.
Right.
That, I think, scares a lot of people, because I'm certainly open to people interpreting the world however they so choose. But I think it scares a lot of academics and a lot of students when I say, have we established the fact? What's really going on? What does the data actually show? Because that's hard to ignore.
Right.
And one of the things that has surfaced since I wrote the op-ed in the New York Times that focused a lot of attention on this, the argument was that I said we were creating an academic monoculture on campus. Basically, if you were centrist in many areas or right of center in many areas, you would be viewed as an outsider, someone who was evil. You might be aligned with Trump, even though that was highly unlikely.
Right.
And people found you triggering and unpleasant to be around. And I made the case that, if we take a look at the programming available at Sarah Lawrence, it's extremely, again, monolithic. It's only progressive in nature. And I made the horrible claim that we should try to make sure it's a little more balanced.
Now you're,
and that set off the incredible problems that we're having.
So that was the inciting incident was really around your New York Times editorial piece, right? It's October 16th of last year.
Yes.
And the title is "Think Professors Are Liberal, Try School Administrators." And basically what you're pointing out in this piece is that you think the professor community is really rigged in one ideological bent, but you're saying actually school administration and the people who actually stack the lineup for these events on campuses and stuff, they're actually even more ideologically monolithic, right?
They are. They're also more powerful. If you take a look at a lot of schools in your own neighborhood, like UCF, which, by the way, is a place I visited on a number of occasions. If you take a look, the folks who control so much of what goes on campus, it's not just what goes on in the classroom, but orientation. What goes on with student life? What goes on in dormitories? I know UCSF doesn't have a huge number of dorms. I know they're building more. But if you take a look at residential life, again, dining halls, dormitories, student spaces, all of this programming occurs outside of the classroom. All of this programming is not within the purview or general interest of most faculty. We don't really focus on that. But there's a huge class of administrators that is setting the agenda. They deal with student discipline, student rules, student life, and again, all of this extracurricular programming. So when I looked at this and said, what's really going on here? Is it professors? Well, the press would have you believe that there are activist professors, and there absolutely are. And when they speak up, they generate a fair amount of attention, no question. But most professors would rather actually go home. They'd like to do their teaching. They'd like to do their research. They'd like to spend time with their families. Spending time dealing with social issues, political issues, and student life is not high on that list. As someone who's a new dad, I certainly love working with my students when I can, but I also have a little boy at home who I want to see. So I go home. My job is not to do student programming. But there are a large number of staff on campus whose very job it is to do that student programming.
So they kind of see themselves as community. They kind of see themselves as community organizers in some sense, right? They're shaping the ethos of the community on campus.
That's exactly right. And when you actually survey them, and I did for the first time ever, I reached out to about 9,400 of them. I heard back from about 900 of them, a great sample, 10% response rate. I was thrilled to get such a nice number. What becomes very clear with such a, when you look at the sample is they're very liberal, they're very progressive, and they want to influence the way things happen on campus. Who wouldn't?
Right.
If your job is to do student programming, wouldn't you want to advance your own personal goals? And that's what we're seeing.
We're talking with Dr. Samuel Abrams at Sarah Lawrence College. He's been the victim of kind of what I would say a little bit of a mob witch hunt in some degree. We're going to get into that more on the other side. I'm also interested in knowing about some of the administrators at UCF here in Orlando. I'd love to speak with them. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski. We'll see you in just a moment. Hi, David Gornoski here, and you're listening to A Neighbor's Choice Radio on News Radio 93.1 WFLA, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Samuel Abrams at Sarah Lawrence College. And I just was fascinated by Dr. Abrams' story because I first saw it in the National Review by Mr. French put a column out there that was talking about how you're still enduring ongoing annoyance and harassment. I don't know to what degree, but I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit. So
Sure.
you're not even really, deeply conservative or anything. I think you're probably kind of a centrist or moderate, but you wrote a New York Times editorial wherein you kind of surveyed and analyzed and found that school administrations at a lot of these universities are even more deeply ideologically monolithic than even the professors. So it seems like the professors, which get all the attention in the media, are like the cherry on top of this sundae, right?
Exactly, and it was very important to me that we flip the script a little bit on that and let people know, because parents don't understand this, students don't understand it. We get at Sarah Lawrence and around the country, students come in. They're very excited. They pick Sarah Lawrence or whatever school they pick because they're interested in career opportunities. They're interested in the classes, the professors. We always hear about so-and-so professor won this award, or so-and-so professor, writes poems and is a poet laureate of something or something like that. And, you don't hear about the fact that actually the school is overwhelmingly paying for large amounts of salaries and this administrative bloat. And when you get to campus as a first year, notice I don't say freshman because it's gendered, but first year, because that could be triggering for some, the idea is that, you spend the first week or two being indoctrinated. We don't necessarily see, faculty don't see the students. They're with administrators who have a very different charge when they're working on college and university campuses. As a teacher, my job is, I like to say it's like Batman. I give everyone a tool belt. I try to give them as many tools on that belt as I can to help them see the world, to help them question the world. And that means talking about the world from a liberal perspective, a progressive perspective, and then a libertarian and a conservative perspective.
Right.
Absolutely. That's what we do. And I believe a lot of faculty can do that. The issue is you have this huge class of administrators which outnumber faculty in this country. And they are setting an agenda outside of the classroom. So, I'll go into a class of first years, and, unprompted, students will say, well, don't we need to talk about our pronouns? I didn't mention anything about pronouns. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the first day of reading. Eventually that stuff might come out, but immediately the agenda has been set, and it's set by non-academics. It's set by this administrative class. It's a problem.
By the way, I identify on Facebook as pangender, so anything I say is totally unquestionable, just to let you know.
There you go.
There's no argument allowed. But anyways, continue here. So they want you to kind of stick to the script of this, what I would call this critical theory, which, when I was in school, I was studying in the communication classes, and they were really big on this critical theory.
Yes.
And I guess it's just speeding up, escalating every year. So it ended up so that the students were vandalizing your office. What was going on with that?
They were. One thing I wanted to say, though, just
Sure.
to follow up on your lead-in was, or the past segment, is you had mentioned victimization. And I'm really glad you did, because I actually don't want to say that I'm a victim. Things happened. That's what it was. One of the problems with critical theory is that everyone now on college campuses looks to identify themselves with one category or another of being a victim. And that to me is very problematic. That leads to an inward sort of focus. That leads to the idea that someone has harmed somebody else rather than a focus on collectivity, community, civility, and the individual.
Right.
So sorry to interrupt, but victimization, I think, is something that is very common and overly used on our college and university campuses, and I think leads to this very inward-looking sort of student body. As for what happened, many things. In addition to the just vandalism, people threatened my little boy. I had a picture of my little boy in a Sarah Lawrence college T-shirt. It went missing. Lots of hate mail, lots of horrendous things online. Students seem to misunderstand that if you post something on Twitter or Instagram, people are going to see it. It means something. It matters. It's not just playtime. If I go ahead and accuse a student of any number of things, for instance, there were flyers all over campus accusing me of sexual assault. First time I've heard of that. I mean, that's incredible. That's very dangerous. It's an environment you don't want to create. And I was shocked and appalled by that, and also disappointed by the fact that the school's administration itself, the president and provost, didn't take the lead quickly to say, this is not what we do. This is uncivil.
Right.
This is not how we have disagreements with people. You don't just throw anything you can at the person because you're upset or you disagree with them.
Right. Are you familiar with the work of the late Rene Girard from Stanford?
I am not.
Well, he was an anthropologist, passed away a couple years ago, but he has a lot of interesting insights into understanding the nature of politics, and I can just see it all over here in this story. I take the concept of politics as kind of a vestige of religion. You know, that word religion, the Latin root, means to bind together. So when I think of what is your political ideology, it's really a question of what do you think should bind us together as a people, and the laws we create, the culture we create, and the things that we imitate and promote as proper role modeling. And so I see this as a religious situation that we have on hands, that what's going on the college campuses is a form of a religious warfare wherein you have this kind of purity test where you must, be pure on the dogmatic, recitations of the principles. And if there's any impurity, you are profaning the sacred oneness that preserves the campus's sense of identity. Did you feel that?
It's hard to disagree with that. And I actually have a piece coming out this week in a place called Minding the Campus, edited by a gentleman named John Leo. And I actually have some very disturbing data in that. That the first part is that I have received dozens and dozens and dozens of emails from students, current and past, at Sarah Lawrence after this whole brouhaha blew up, saying, this is crazy, the students are out of line, but I'm afraid to speak up.
Right.
I can't say anything exactly for the logic and rationale you just articulated.
Right. See,
and then there is some survey data asking questions such as, are you intimidated? Are you uncomfortable? Do you feel capable of asking questions or taking positions that are unpopular for fear of reprisal or repercussions?
Right.
Turns out that close to 2/3 of students who identify as conservative say they are. That means we're silencing a significant portion of our student body. That is the antithesis of higher education.
And what percentage was that of students?
About 2/3.
2/3 identify as conservative?
No.
Oh.
2/3 of our conservative identifying students are afraid to speak out.
Okay, yeah, sure, yeah, okay.
What is troubling, though, is that of the folks who identify as moderate or liberal, 53% are afraid to speak out. So we still have a majority of those on the left who are afraid to speak out. And I'll give you an example of that. Back during the 2016 election cycle, when Trump was running and Clinton was running, Trump was never an option on Sarah Lawrence's campus. However, there were a significant number of students who were very interested in Hillary Clinton. But Hillary Clinton is not the darling of the progressive movement, and a lot of people actually thought she was a traitor. Those students who were Hillary Clinton supporters were scared. They were shamed into silence. They would come to me and ask, what can I do? How do I protect myself? People were harassed. They were physically threatened. They had the same sort of stuff happen to them on their doors as well. And they were very, very, very scared of this. So, this is not a great environment. And again, very dangerous for the future of our polity.
It sounds like you're going to have to paint like lamb's blood on your doorpost or something just to make sure that the death angels of the social justice people don't come at you over there. We're going to take
the holiday of Passover is coming up, so it does work.
We'll take a quick commercial break. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski, talking with Dr. Abrams of Sarah Lawrence College. Hold on just a second. Who is your neighbor? Who do you consider in the same image as you are? Who do you see yourself in relationship to the community that you seek to be a part of? That's what we explore here on A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your neighbor, David Gornoski. So glad you could join me. And I'm speaking with Dr. Sam Abrams over at Sarah Lawrence College. And we're going through how he was railroaded. He's a rather centrist person, I would say, politically, and he teaches political theory. But he was railroaded by the campus community after he wrote a New York Times opinion piece wherein he pointed out the obvious fact, I guess, that people who are on these campuses experience, which is that it's not just professors but administrators that are totally in a kind of totalitarian 99 to 1 mentality. And I think, Dr. Abrams, there's a lot we can learn from if we mine some of history. I like to look at anthropology. And so when I look at stories, look at the story of the ancient Hebrew people with Leviticus when they had the scapegoat ritual. And I think about how they had two goats. One was considered blessed for, purification and sacrifice. And the other one was the scapegoat, which they would all, the priest would lay his hands on and take all of the sins of the community, all of their imperfections, all of their hate, all of their nastiness, and he would channel it, in kind of a ritual fashion and say, look, I'm putting this all on the goat, and then the goat would be excommunicated from the community, into the wilderness. And so when I hear about them going on mob attacks, taking photos of your little child and vandalizing your office and making scurrilous, horrible accusations against you just for making a moderate comment, it reminds me of the ancient practice of scapegoating. And I think of, these campuses see themselves as a religiously, they don't use that word, but that's what they're feeling. They feel sacred and they're binding together of their shared, identity, their shared grievances, and it's a purity place. It's a place of, it's like a temple, these college campuses. And so you, representing someone that's like, I don't think that's exactly the whole world, when you come back in and say that, that's like the scapegoat from the old days coming back into the ancient Israelite camps and drinking from the well that they're all using. You're, oh my goodness, you've profaned everything we are. I think that's what's going on.
It also sadly explains the level of vitriol that they show. Because again, these are people I don't know. I haven't met these people. I don't have relationships with these people. It's troublesome to think that people can turn and have such hatred for someone they just have never met. That's dangerous. That's so dangerous. And again, is the antithesis of what college and university life is supposed to be about. College and university life is about many things, one of which, in my opinion, is to be uncomfortable. I can talk to you for days about how awkward and uncomfortable I was in college. Some of it was my fault. Some of it was the fact that I was awkward and figuring things out. And I think that's normal. We figure these things out, in our late teens. That's the whole point. Some of it may have been institutional issues. Some of it may have been just the fact that I was an East Coast kid going to college out in Palo Alto, California. Who knows? But the idea is you're supposed to be open. You're supposed to see. You're supposed to question. And you have to stop assuming that if you question something or you disagree, it means you're evil. It doesn't mean you're evil. It just means you're questioning. And we see that we see that impulse to jump on people far too often and emerge far too quickly.
So when you were a student at Stanford University and then Harvard, did you notice this? Was it as bad back then, or what's the difference between now and then? Anything?
Oh, I don't think it was as bad. I listened to the student protesters and at Sarah Lawrence quite a bit. And, some of them were saying, oh, you have to understand we're far away from our families. That's hard. That puts stress on us. And I'm thinking, when I was your age, I lived 3,400 miles away from my family. I did not go home for breaks. I did not have the money to go home for breaks. And when I made phone calls, it was in the good old days when you actually had to pay 10 cents or 15 cents a minute. It wasn't unlimited free cell phone calls or FaceTime. The world is completely different. But I also realized that I made a choice to go from the East Coast and go to college out west. I didn't blame anyone for that. I realized there were trade-offs, the whole idea of individualism. I didn't see myself as a victim. One of the things that happened with the generational switch, I'm at the tail end of the angry Gen Xers, but one of the things we see with the iGen group, the folks who are late millennials and now Generation Z, is I hate to say it, but it's well documented, there's a certain sense of narcissism and individualism that goes against the idea of community and against the idea of saying there's a larger society in which we're embedded in. That may be feeding into a big part of it. And we see that now, and that leads to this idea of, well, I'm a victim. You're not a victim. You chose to come to an elite liberal arts college. If you wanted to be closer to home, no one's stopping you from picking another school that's closer to home.
Yeah, and yet these campus groups, I looked at some of their claims about you, and they said that you are, especially your New York Times opinion piece, you are questioning their very identity and their very existence. They use that word. You are challenging our existence. And they're saying that you're imposing danger against black community and LGBTQAYZ community and the the feminist community, that you're a threat to them. What did logic, are you threatening?
I've delegitimized and dehumanized 85% of the population, which is crazy. I don't read it that way. I don't think most people would read it that way. Certainly the New York Times editorial board did not read it that way. And I guess I'm such a threat when I take my students to see these crazy plays called Hamilton, or take them to tapings of Morning Joe on MSNBC, or buy pizza and make sure I have vegetarian options and vegan options, gluten-free options when we watch election returns. So I guess all of that work is.
Do you trigger people if you have Do you trigger people if you have pepperoni on the pizza?
It's funny. I don't eat it, but I'm very happy to treat people who want it and like it. I have no problem with that. So no, it's very hurtful. It's very strange, and I try not to respond to it because it's just so absurd. It's just an absurd claim, and I don't want to debate it because it doesn't have any merit.
But isn't this like Lord of the Flies, though? I see you as like Piggy. You're that character who's reading. You're reading the reasonable ideas. You're proposing. And you've got the conch, and you're getting people organized, and then one day they just throw a boulder on you, and your glasses are broken, and everything's a disaster. I mean, if you're silent,
I have some pretty strong glasses now. Actually, number one, made out of buffalo horn, so they won't break. But more importantly, I'm not stuck on an island, and I think that's an important thing to mention. I think that for a number of cases we see around the country, it's very bad if you are a professor at a small liberal arts college or even a university that's somewhat isolated. We hear about issues at Evergreen, for instance, in Oregon, or up in Bowdoin in Maine. That can be problematic, or Middlebury in Vermont. That can be problematic. I live in the biggest city, well, maybe the second, depending on how you count. I live in a very large city in New York. My community is a little bigger, so I think it would be different. I think it would be the pressures would be very different if I were isolated. But, as soon as I step out of the Sarah Lawrence College bubble, the rest of the world doesn't agree with the students. And I think the uniform coverage of this has made that very, very clear. And if nothing else, one of the things, and I'd love to say it to your listeners, since I have received quite a few wonderful emails from people in Florida, and I have family who lives over in Tampa, not too far from you guys, is that the rest of the world doesn't agree with the students, their worldview, or this sort of behavior. And when I get hundreds of emails a day of late saying this, it's very much appreciated, and it very much reminds me that America still is great, and we have not been completely overtaken by this sort of worldview yet.
It was very good, and I just think that if these people who are in these elite universities, they tend to be the ones that are fast tracked to positions of power, and I wonder if we can't find a way to heal these people. Because I know the broad majority probably still against what they're doing, their witch hunting behavior, but I just want to, I have, maybe it's like the hot stove syndrome, I still want to go after them and try to heal them from their ideology. Not that they have to reject everything, but just cool it down, stop trying to destroy and dehumanize your enemies. I'm concerned about these people because they're fast-tracked in the elite schools. What are they going to do if they're in the halls of power in Congress and we've got a majority when I'm middle-aged and everything and they're running to Congress and they still have this mentality of trying to destroy someone because you wrote an opinion column, but now they have the force and the bludgeon of the state behind them. That's terrifying to me. What do we do about that?
I'm not as concerned. I would say for two reasons. First, at a lot of the elite schools, there are people who realize that this is problematic, and I spend a fair amount of time with these sorts of people. And they tend to not be as extreme as you might think. Also, to pay due to our 5,400 institutions of higher education in this country, and they do amazing things. If you take a look, the elites don't dominate everything. They've begun to in certain areas, but for the most part, if you look at Congress, a considerable number of them, folks who are currently serving, did not necessarily come from elite backgrounds. And I think, especially in the age of social media, which has shattered the pre-existing networks, you don't need the smoky room to fundraise. You don't need to, have your quid pro quo relations with party bosses to get attention anymore. We're seeing more and more of that happen around the country, and I'm hopeful that actually will lead to more discourse, more speech, and more real representation. So
very good.
I'm not saying that you might be, you might be totally right. I don't know. I'm trying to be just a little optimistic.
Well, very good. And I'm hoping that we can have a reformation and really break through this lock hold on universities that people have. Dr. Samuel Abrams, thank you very much for being on the program. I look forward to hearing from you again. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski. We'll see you in a second. A Neighbor's Choice Radio is back, and I'm your host, David Gornoski, and so glad you could be here in my neighborhood. And how are you doing? Are you doing great? If you want to send in a message about your story, how you're overcoming groupthink, maybe it's on your college campus, as we just heard from Dr. Sam Abrams over at Sarah Lawrence College. Or maybe you are in a business world and you're receiving political correctness or some kind of witch hunt attacking you. Tell me your story. And it doesn't have to be named. You can be anonymous if you don't want the public to hear your name. I understand there's a lot of fear out there. There shouldn't be, but I understand. We'll work with it. You can always email me directly, hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello at the letter A, neighborschoice.com. hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'd love to hear from you, because what I do is I'm always interviewing people who are scapegoats and misfits for a variety of reasons. And we want to give them a voice. We want to give people who are struggling to do what's right, to advance liberty or virtue or free speech or free thought or some kind of new innovative idea in science and technology. And I know you're out there. We're broadcasting live all over Orlando and online all over the world. And I know there are a lot of people. Orlando's the number one place for tourism. So I know that we're reaching people all over the globe right now who are driving all through the beautiful city of Orlando. And I know you have stories to tell. I know your professors. I know your students. I know your business owners. I know your employees. And we want to hear from you because we give a voice to the misfit. You're not going to hear it anywhere else on the program. This is the Underdog Radio program. And we are together going to flip the script of what's expected in society. We're going to flip the script of this negative thought frequency that continues to dominate our social institutions. We don't have to retreat into nihilism or meaninglessness. We can have a meaningful, purposeful, positive experience, including our politics. Because ultimately, politics is a vestige of an older time. It's a time, politics is a throwback to scapegoating and witch hunts and mob hunts, and we don't need it as the primary thing that glues us together. We need social institutions like family, churches, clubs, intellectual groups, free speech advocacy groups, and businesses to come together and reassert their power and their influence in society and not cower because of fear of being attacked. They don't have power. They're really, the people who are castigating and mob hunting and witch hunting against anybody who deviates off of their social justice extremism or big government obsession. They're really motivated by fear. And their way of winning is to get you to contagiously have fear too. If you imitate their fear, then they've got you where you want them. But if you maintain confidence in the face of the crowd, in the face of the mob, you will break their cycle. You will break that vengeance aggression cycle. If you show not aggression back at them, but confidence, peace, and not apologizing. That's the number one thing. I remember Paula Deen, when they dug up something she said like in private, like 3 decades ago. And she had a number one show on Food Network. She was all over the place. And because she admitted that she said a bad word in private 3 decades ago, everything was eliminated from her. She was just blacklisted. Now, of course, she's been working to push herself back up. But it just shows you that when you apologize, they see that as blood in the water. And that's just the mimetic groupthink mob mentality of tribalism, which is at the heart of politics and government. So we don't want government to be the arbiter of our thought processes. So we have to fight for what we have now. Fight for our freedom of speech, fight for our freedom of self-defense, and never, ever apologize for doing any of it. Don't apologize for loving your family. Don't apologize for loving your children and having children. There's no reason to be ashamed of it. It's what we were made to be. We were made to be culture of life. We were not made to be a culture of shame and fear, and we're not going to imitate that vestige of fear that has maintained itself in the dark shadows of our college campuses and our media institutions, who are basically dinosaurs of thought. But we're going to bring them into the camp, folks. We are the people of liberty, and liberty brings everyone together. Liberty empowers everyone to have prosperity. Liberty allows everyone, regardless of your gender or regardless of your race or your class or where you live, to come together as human persons made in the image of God, endowed with sacred beauty beyond compare of any creature known in the galaxy. You are made in that image of beauty. You have no reason to fear. You have every reason to be fully empowered, fully motivated, and fully ambitious. So I want to hear from you. hello@aneighborschoice.com. If you're driving, don't write it down, but try to remember, hello@aneighborschoice.com. We want to hear from you because we're going to tell your story like no one else will. Because most of the media is still outdated. It's still old-fashioned and stinky. It's still based on really dumb ideas of big government and collusion with big business. But we're past those days. We see that stuff in the driver's seat of history. We're in the driver's seat of history. We look in the rearview mirror and we see their ideas and we're passing them at 100 miles an hour. We're never going back to those times. So never let them get you down. The moment they get into your head, they're going to get you to imitate the fear and the anxiety that they're ruled by. And you never want to be in their mental prison. We all have mental prisons, by the way. No, we're not the purity side. We have our own problems. People who love liberty and markets and freedom. But don't let this mob mentality that's trying to puff and puff like it's so big, it's just a gnat. It wants you to believe it's a giant. It's just a gnat. We can, if we have determination and we work together across the aisle. I want to join people from all the communities. We all can come together on freedom, on imitating the principles that Jesus put into society. 70% of the country says they are Christian. The word Christian means basically, literally, little Jesus, a little imitator of Jesus. So that's the black community, that's the Hispanic community, Asian community. There's most people in America say, hey, I'm a little Jesus. When you ask them, that they don't say it that way, but that's what they mean. They mean, I imitate Jesus. That's what the word Christian means. So why don't we use that as our binding together agent? Instead of using big government and violence and blame games as our binding agent, you always have to have glue to bind something together, to build something. So for our community, why not the glue that binds us together be imitating the person of Jesus, who never uses scapegoating, who never uses blame games, who never excludes people because they don't say the right thing or they write the wrong editorial in the New York Times or National Review or whatever, but someone who treats people as individual human persons who are made with beauty and sacredness. And from that principle, we can understand why we have markets, why freedom is important, why we shouldn't criminalize nonviolent behavior. Hey, the reason why people like Dr. Abrams are having this point where they're being witch hunted off campuses because of what they say for speech is because we as a society have abandoned individual freedom as the cornerstone of our society for the rest of issues. If your government has the power to put you in a prison cage because of what you put in your body or how you run your business, that's a nonviolent behavior. But at the moment they have the power to criminalize those things, they have the power to criminalize your speech. Because if they can criminalize what you put in your body, they can criminalize what you come out in your body, what you speak from your mouth. You have total sovereignty in God. There's no reason to fear. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to humanity in the new world order that Jesus is creating, and there's no stopping it. There is no stopping it. The only people in our way are ourselves whenever we doubt. We have the ability to solve energy, to solve medicine, to cure these wicked diseases that plague our family members, and to solve problems like transportation and wars. We do not have to cower in fear. We will build a better future for our family right now. We're not passing the buck to politicians. We'll do it neighbor to neighbor. Just watch on our program. You'll see it happen, and you'll be a part of it. We'll see you tomorrow on News Radio 93.1 WFLA. And I look forward to hearing from you. Hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm your neighbor, David Gornoski. Godspeed.